Chapter 1. The Call That Changed Everything. Dale Roberson was tending to his tomatoes when the phone rang. 20 years of CIA field work had taught him to notice details others missed. The way morning light filtered through his kitchen window, the precise angle of his pruning shears, the subtle tremor in his wife Marta's voice as she answered. "It's the hospital," she whispered, her face draining of color. "Casey's been in an accident." Dale's hands stilled on the garden tools. Casey, their 18-year-old son, had been driving to his part-time job at the hardware store. The same route he'd taken 100 times before. The drive to Riverside General felt like navigating through molasses. Dale's training kicked in. Assess the situation, gather intelligence, control what you can control. But this wasn't Kabul or Moscow. This was his son. Dr. Felicia Higgins met them in the trauma ward, her expression professionally composed, but her eyes betraying the gravity. "Mr. and Mrs. Roberson, Casey suffered severe head trauma. He's in a medically induced coma while we monitor brain swelling." "What happened?" Dale's voice was steady, but Marta's hand found his, squeezing tight. "Hit and run." The other vehicle struck him at high speed, then fled the scene. "I'm sorry, there were no witnesses." As Dr. Higgins explained the medical details, Dale's mind cataloged inconsistencies. No skid marks suggested the other driver hadn't even tried to brake. The damage pattern indicated a large vehicle, likely an SUV. The timing, 2:30 p.m. on a Tuesday, meant this wasn't some drunk teenager joyriding. Leslie Sexton, Casey's nurse, was changing 4 bags when Dale returned from the cafeteria. She glanced around nervously before leaning closer. "Mr. Roberson, I need to tell you something, but I could lose my job." Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. "The police already know who did this." Security footage from Hartley's gas station caught everything. License plate, driver's face, everything. Dale's pulse quickened, but his expression remained neutral. "Who?" "Dominic McCullough, the mayor's son." Leslie's hands shook as she adjusted Casey's blanket. "Word is, his father's already making calls. My supervisor told us to keep quiet, said the investigation was ongoing." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Gregory McCullough, mayor for 12 years, had built his career on law and order rhetoric while his own son terrorized the streets in his modified Escalade. Dale had researched the family when McCullough first ran for office. Old money, political connections stretching back 3 generations. "Why are you telling me this?" Dale asked. Leslie met his gaze. "Because I have a son Casey's age. And because someone should know the truth." That evening, Dale sat in Casey's room, watching the steady rise and fall of his son's chest. The machines beeped rhythmically, a mechanical heartbeat that had become his world's soundtrack. Marta had finally gone home to shower and grab clothes, leaving Dale alone with his thoughts. Casey had always been the light in their lives, quick to laugh, fiercely loyal to his friends, planning to study engineering at State. He'd never hurt anyone, never even gotten a speeding ticket. Now he lay surrounded by tubes and wires because some privileged brat thought the streets were his personal playground. Dale pulled out his phone and began making calls. His first was to Byron O'Neill, his former CIA handler now running a private security firm in D.C. "Dale? Christ, it's been what, 5 years? How's retirement treating you? I need a favor, Byron." "Background check on Gregory McCullough, mayor of Riverside. His son Dominic too. Everything you can find. Personal or professional?" Dale looked at his unconscious son. "Both." Chapter 2. Unveiling the Web. 3 days later, Dale's phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Byron. The file that arrived painted a picture of systematic corruption that made Dale's stomach turn. Gregory McCullough's administration had been skimming city contracts for years, funneling money through shell companies owned by his brother-in-law, Greg McCullough. Judge Stanley Farley, a longtime family friend, had dismissed 17 cases involving McCullough family members over the past decade. The mayor's wife, Guadalupe McCullough, ran a nonprofit that existed mainly on paper, its donations mysteriously disappearing into offshore accounts. But it was Dominic's file that truly revealed the monster. 3 prior hit-and-runs, all covered up. A sexual assault allegation that vanished after the victim's family suddenly moved out of state. A pattern of increasingly dangerous behavior enabled by Daddy's political machine. Dale was still processing the information when his phone rang. Unknown number, local area code. "Mr. Roberson? This is Mayor McCullough. I believe we need to talk." The man's voice carried the oily confidence of someone accustomed to getting his way. Dale's hand tightened on the phone. About what? About putting this unfortunate situation behind us. I'm prepared to ensure your son receives the best possible care. And of course, there would be significant compensation for your family's inconvenience. The audacity was breathtaking. Dale forced his voice to remain calm. Your son put my boy in a coma and drove away. What makes you think this is something we can just put behind us? A pause. When McCullough spoke again, his tone had shifted, showing teeth. Mr. Roberson, you strike me as an intelligent man. Judge Farley has already reviewed the evidence, what little there is, and determined it's insufficient for prosecution. Sometimes accidents happen, and pursuing them only causes more pain for everyone involved. So that's it. Your son walks free. My son is at home, devastated by this tragedy. As am I. But we must be realistic about what can be accomplished through legal channels. McCullough's voice dropped. I understand you had quite an impressive career before retirement. I'd hate for old habits to lead you down a path you'd regret. The threat was clear, but McCullough had made a crucial error. He'd revealed that he knew about Dale's CIA background, which meant he'd done research. More importantly, he'd just confessed that Judge Farley was already prepared to dismiss the case. I appreciate the call, Mayor. You've been illuminating. Dale hung up and immediately dialed Tim Ferris, Riverside's police chief. They'd met at a few city functions over the years, and Dale's instincts suggested Ferris was one of the honest ones. Chief, this is Dale Roberson. My son Casey was the hit-and-run victim on Tuesday. I'd like to discuss the investigation. Dale, Jesus, I'm sorry about Casey. How's he doing? The genuine concern in Ferris's voice confirmed Dale's assessment. Still in a coma. Chief, I know who did this. A long pause. Dale, I can't discuss an ongoing investigation. Dominic McCullough. There's security footage, isn't there? Another pause, longer this time. Can you meet me at Murphy's Diner in an hour? And Dale, come alone. Murphy's Diner occupied a corner lot downtown, the kind of place where locals gathered to complain about weather and politics. Chief Ferris sat in a back booth, his uniform rumpled, his expression grim. You were right about the footage, Ferris said without preamble. Crystal clear video of Dominic McCullough plowing into your son's Honda, then speeding away. Kid was doing at least 60 in a 35 zone. Then why isn't he arrested? Ferris stared into his coffee cup. Because an hour after I sent officers to bring him in, I got a call from the mayor. Then another from Judge Farley. Then one from my supervisor at the state level. He looked up, meeting Dale's eyes. I've been a cop for 23 years. I've never seen pressure like this. What kind of pressure? The kind that ends careers. My pension, my family's health insurance. It all goes away if I pursue this. Ferris leaned forward. Dale, I have 2 daughters in college and a wife with cancer. I can't afford to be a hero. Dale studied the man across from him. Ferris wasn't weak or corrupt. He was trapped by a system designed to protect people like the McCulloughs. It was a familiar scenario from Dale's CIA days, where power structures operated beyond the reach of normal justice. What would you do if you were me? Dale asked. Ferris was quiet for a long moment. Honestly, I'd probably do something I'd regret. And then I'd regret not doing it sooner. He stood to leave, then paused. Dale, there's something else. Dominic McCullough has been bragging about the accident at local bars, calling it a road test of his new modifications. Kid thinks it's all a big joke. After Ferris left, Dale remained in the booth, his mind racing. The legal system had been corrupted, the police neutralized, and the media, he'd checked, was owned by companies that depended on city contracts. Traditional avenues of justice were closed. But Dale Roberson hadn't spent 2 decades dismantling terrorist networks and corrupt regimes by playing by traditional rules. That evening, he made 2 more calls. The first was to Mark Daly, a former Navy SEAL who'd helped Dale with Black Ops in Eastern Europe. The second was to Janelle Goldberg, an investigative reporter with the state newspaper who owed him a favor from a story he'd fed her about defense contractors. Then Dale walked down to his basement and opened the steel door he hadn't unlocked in 5 years. Inside, carefully preserved and maintained, were the tools of his former trade. Surveillance equipment, encrypted communications devices, documents with official seals that could still open certain doors. He'd retired to a quiet life, content to grow tomatoes and watch his son become a man. But Gregory McCullough had made a fatal error in judgment. He'd threatened the wrong father. And now he was about to discover what happened when you cornered a man who'd spent 20 years learning how to destroy people much more dangerous than a small-town politician. Chapter 3. The Machinery of Vengeance. The basement workshop hadn't changed in 5 years. Dale's tools remained exactly as he'd left them: surveillance equipment designed to be undetectable, communication devices that operated on frequencies the FBI didn't monitor, and documents that could still fool most authentication systems. Mark Daly arrived at dawn, his pickup truck loaded with equipment that officially didn't exist. 6 feet of solid muscle with prematurely gray hair, Mark had transitioned from military to private security, specializing in discrete problem resolution for clients who preferred to remain anonymous. "Heard about Casey," Mark said, unloading a case of electronics. "How bad?" "Bad. And the bastard who did it thinks Daddy's money makes him untouchable." Mark's expression hardened. "What's the play?" Dale had spent the night planning, drawing on 20 years of experience in psychological operations and targeted disruption. "We're going to systematically dismantle their entire operation. Not just the kid, the whole family. Every corrupt deal, every covered-up crime, every dirty secret. By the time we're finished, the McCullough name will be synonymous with corruption in this state." They spent the morning setting up surveillance equipment throughout Riverside. High-definition cameras with facial recognition software positioned near the mayor's office, Dominic's favorite bars, Judge Farley's courthouse. Audio pickups that could isolate conversations from 100 yards away. GPS trackers for their vehicles. Digital infiltration tools for their phones and computers. At noon, Janelle Goldberg arrived. A sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, she'd built a reputation for taking down politicians who thought they were above the law. Her investigation into the State Lottery Commission had resulted in 17 indictments and a Pulitzer Prize nomination. "Dale, I'm sorry about your son. When you called, you mentioned you had information about the McCullough administration." Dale handed her an encrypted drive containing Byron's research. "Everything you need to prove they've been stealing from the city for years. Shell companies, offshore accounts, falsified contracts, the whole playbook." Janelle's eyes widened as she scrolled through the files. "This is comprehensive. How did you?" She stopped, studying Dale's face. "Never mind, I don't want to know. But if even half of this is accurate, it's the biggest political scandal in state history." "It's all accurate. But I need something in return." "Name it. When you publish, I want Dominic McCullough's history included. Every covered-up crime, every victim his father silenced. The hit and run on my son was just the latest in a pattern of escalating violence." Janelle nodded. "That kind of systematic corruption story sells papers. When do you need this published?" 2 weeks. That gives me time to gather additional evidence." Dale met her gaze. "And Janelle? When this breaks, you'll need to be ready for retaliation. The McCulloughs won't go quietly." After she left, Dale and Mark began phase 2 of their operation. Using credentials that technically no longer existed, Dale accessed the state database of criminal records, building a comprehensive file of every crime the McCullough family had covered up or dismissed. 3 hit and runs, 2 sexual assaults, a suspicious death following a bar fight, all linked to Dominic, all buried by his father's influence. The psychological profile that emerged was of a sociopathic personality enabled by unlimited resources and 0 consequences. Dominic McCullough genuinely believed he was untouchable, which would be his downfall. That evening, Dale visited Casey again. The doctors were cautiously optimistic about reduced brain swelling, but his son remained unconscious, trapped in a world Dale couldn't reach. Marta sat beside the bed, reading aloud from Casey's favorite books as if her voice could guide him back. "Any change?" Dale asked. "His vitals are stronger today. Dr. Higgins thinks he can hear us." Marta looked up, studying Dale's face. "You've been making plans." It wasn't a question. After 25 years of marriage, Marta could read him like a map. She knew about his CIA work, understood the kind of man she'd married. She'd never asked him to be someone else. "The people who did this think they're above the law, and you're going to prove them wrong." Dale sat down, taking her hand. "I need you to take a vacation. Visit your sister in Portland for a few weeks. Take some time away from all this." Marta's eyes flashed. "You want me to run while you handle this alone?" "Dale Roberson, I've stood by you through 20 years of dangerous work. I'm not abandoning you now. This is different. If things go wrong, then we face it together." She squeezed his hand. Casey is my son too. And if these people think they can destroy our family and walk away, they're about to learn how wrong they are. Her fierce loyalty reminded Dale why he'd fallen in love with her in the first place. Marta wasn't just a military wife who'd learned to cope with uncertainty. She was a partner who'd chosen to stand with him regardless of the cost. The next morning, Dale implemented Phase 3 of his plan. Using skills he'd hoped never to need again, he began psychological warfare against the McCullough family. Anonymous packages containing photos of their crimes delivered to their offices. Encrypted emails with details of their offshore accounts sent to their personal devices. Phone calls in the middle of the night that played recordings of their victims' voices. By week's end, the pressure was showing. Gregory McCullough had increased his security detail and was refusing public appearances. Judge Farley had requested reassignment to a different district. Dominic had stopped going to bars, instead staying home under his father's watchful protection. But Dale's real masterstroke was still to come. Through Mark's contacts, he'd arranged for Dominic's modified Escalade, the weapon that had nearly killed Casey, to be borrowed from the McCullough estate. Forensic analysis would reveal not just Casey's DNA on the vehicle, but evidence from the previous hit-and-runs that had been covered up. The psychological pressure, media investigation, and physical evidence would converge in 2 weeks, creating a perfect storm that would destroy the McCullough family's power structure. But Dale had learned long ago that no plan survives contact with the enemy unchanged. Gregory McCullough was about to make his next move, and it would force Dale to reveal just how dangerous a concerned father could become. Chapter 4. The Hunter Becomes the Hunted. The first attempt on Dale's life came at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. Motion sensors in his driveway triggered silently, alerts pulsing on his phone as 2 men approached his house through the backyard. Dale had been awake for hours, monitoring surveillance feeds from his basement command center. Professional assassins would have come from the front, using lockpicks and silencers. These men carried crowbars and tire irons, muscle hired to send a message, not necessarily to kill. Still dangerous, but predictable. Dale moved through his house like smoke, using routes he'd practiced for years. The intruders were good, better than typical street thugs, but they weren't trained for someone with his skills. He reached the kitchen as they broke through the sliding glass door, their faces covered by ski masks. "Where is he?" one hissed to his partner. The answer came from behind them. "Right here." Dale's first shot, fired through a noise suppressor, shattered the lead intruder's kneecap. The man collapsed, screaming. His partner spun around, raising his tire iron, but Dale was already moving. A second shot took out the man's elbow, sending him crashing into the dining room table. "Gentlemen," Dale said, his voice conversationally calm, "let's have a discussion about who sent you." The lead intruder, clutching his shattered knee, spat through gritted teeth. "Go to hell." Dale sighed and shot him in the other kneecap. The man's screams woke the neighborhood dogs. His partner, now pale with shock, began talking immediately. "McCullough. Mayor McCullough hired us through Reuben Fritz. We were supposed to rough you up, make you back off the investigation." Reuben Fritz. Dale recognized the name from Byron's intelligence files. Fritz ran a security consulting firm that specialized in intimidation and evidence disposal. His services were available to anyone with enough money and flexible morals. "He said you were some old spook causing problems. Nothing about you being this." Dale zip-tied both men and called Tim Ferriss directly. "Chief, I have 2 injured burglars in my kitchen. They were hired by Gregory McCullough to rough me up." "Dale, Jesus Christ, what happened?" "They brought tire irons to a gunfight. You'll want to question them about their employer before they lawyer up." Ferriss arrived 20 minutes later with paramedics and a crime scene team. The story was straightforward. Home invasion, defender protecting his property, clear case of self-defense. But the implications sent shockwaves through Riverside's power structure. "This changes everything," Ferriss said as the ambulances departed. McCullough just escalated from covering up his son's crimes to attempted murder. "I can't ignore this, no matter how much pressure I'm under." By morning, news of the home invasion had spread throughout Riverside. The official story was that 2 men had attempted to burglarize Dale's home while his son lay in a coma, but the whispered truth was darker. Everyone knew the McCullough family's reputation for silencing problems, and Dale Roberson had just become a very public problem. Janelle Goldberg called at dawn. "Dale, are you all right? I heard about the break-in." "I'm fine." More importantly, are you ready to publish? The story goes live tomorrow morning. Front page of the Sunday edition, full spread on the corruption investigation. But Dale, after last night, I'm worried they'll try to stop publication. Let them try. By tomorrow, Gregory McCullough will have bigger problems than newspaper stories. Dale spent the day implementing the next phase of his plan. Using Mark's surveillance network, he'd tracked Dominic McCullough's movements for 2 weeks, identifying patterns and vulnerabilities. The mayor's son had grown paranoid since the psychological warfare began, but paranoia had made him predictable. Every Tuesday, Dominic visited Dr. Marty McConnell, a discreet psychiatrist who specialized in treating the troubled children of wealthy families. The appointments were never scheduled, always paid in cash, and McConnell's office was in a medical building with limited security. At 2:30 p.m., as Dominic emerged from his therapy session, Dale was waiting in the parking garage. Not to attack. Violence would have been counterproductive. Instead, he wanted Dominic to see his face, to understand that his victim's father was no longer hiding in shadows. "Dominic McCullough," Dale called out. The young man spun around, his hand moving instinctively toward the pistol Dale's surveillance had revealed he now carried. Up close, Dominic looked exactly like what he was, a spoiled sociopath beginning to crack under pressure. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands shaking slightly, his expensive clothes disheveled. "You're him," Dominic said. "The old man whose kid you nearly murdered and then bragged about it," Dale finished. "I wanted you to see my face before your world ends. My father will. Your father sent 2 men to my house last night. They're both in the hospital now, telling very interesting stories to the police." Dale took a step closer. "Did you really think you could hit my son with your car and drive away? Did you think your daddy's money could buy you out of this?" Dominic's hand was definitely on his gun now, but he hadn't drawn it. Some survival instinct was telling him that the man in front of him was far more dangerous than he appeared. It wasn't. Dominic stammered. "Road test. Wasn't that what you called it? A chance to see how your new modifications performed when they hit flesh and bone." The words hit their target. Dominic's face went white as he realized Dale knew about his bragging, his callous description of the accident, as entertainment. "Tomorrow morning," Dale continued, "the whole state is going to read about your family's crimes. Every covered-up hit-and-run, every silenced victim, every dirty deal your father made to protect you. But that's just the beginning." Dale turned to leave, then paused. "Dominic, you might want to consider turning yourself in. The alternative is going to be much worse than prison." As he walked away, Dale heard Dominic's ragged breathing, the sound of a predator finally understanding what it felt like to be prey. That evening, Dale returned to the hospital to find unexpected visitors in Casey's room. Marta sat beside their son's bed, holding the hand of a woman Dale didn't recognize. The stranger was elderly, well-dressed, with intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything. "Dale," Marta said, "this is Grace Sweeney. She wanted to meet you." Grace extended her hand. "Mr. Roberson, thank you for agreeing to see me. I understand you've been having difficulties with the McCullough family." Something in her tone suggested this wasn't a social visit. "Do we know each other, Mrs. Sweeney?" "Not directly, no. But I've been following your situation with great interest." Grace glanced at Casey's still form. "How is your son?" "Improving slowly. The doctors are cautiously optimistic." "I'm glad to hear that. Mr. Roberson, I represent certain interests that have been concerned about the McCullough family's activities for some time. Your recent actions have created opportunities that we'd like to discuss." Dale's instincts sharpened. Grace Sweeney spoke like someone accustomed to wielding power, but there was something else, a careful precision that reminded him of his CIA handlers. "What kind of interests?" Grace smiled. "The kind that prefer corruption to be exposed rather than ignored. Tomorrow's newspaper story will create quite a stir, but stories fade from public memory. Legal consequences, however, tend to be more permanent." She handed Dale a business card with only a phone number. "When you're ready to ensure the McCullough family faces justice through official channels, call that number. We can provide resources that might prove helpful." After she left, Dale studied the card. No name, no address, just a number with a Washington, D.C. area code. Either Grace Sweeney represented federal law enforcement interests, or she was part of the shadow world Dale knew existed parallel to official government. Either way, The McCullough family had just attracted attention from people far more dangerous than a retired CIA officer seeking justice for his son. The war was about to escalate beyond anything Gregory McCullough could imagine. Chapter 5. The Web Unravels. Sunday morning brought chaos to Riverside. Janelle Goldberg's exposé dominated the front page of the state newspaper, complete with photographs, financial documents, and a detailed timeline of McCullough family corruption spanning 20 years. The headline read, "Mayor's Empire of Corruption: How One Family Turned a City into Their Personal ATM." Dale read the article over coffee in Casey's hospital room, watching local news coverage on the television. Reporters surrounded the mayor's office, City Hall, and Judge Farley's residence. The story had been picked up by national outlets within hours, turning Riverside into the epicenter of a political scandal that reached far beyond city limits. "Mr. Roberson?" Dr. Higgins appeared in the doorway, her expression excited. "I have good news. Casey's brain swelling has reduced significantly, and his responses to stimuli are much stronger. We're going to try reducing his sedation today." For the first time in weeks, Dale felt genuine hope. Casey was fighting his way back, just as the people who'd hurt him were finally facing consequences. The first arrest came at 10:15 a.m. Federal agents surrounded Judge Stanley Farley's home, leading him away in handcuffs while news cameras captured every moment. The charges were extensive: bribery, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, money laundering. Farley's judicial immunity wouldn't protect him from federal prosecution. By noon, Reuben Fritz's security consulting firm had been raided, with FBI agents seizing computers, files, and evidence of intimidation campaigns reaching back years. Fritz himself had disappeared, but his associates were being arrested one by one. Dale's phone rang at 12:30. The caller ID showed only numbers, but he recognized Grace Sweeney's voice immediately. "Mr. Roberson, I trust you've seen this morning's news? Hard to miss. Did your people have something to do with the federal response? Let's just say that certain agencies had been building cases against these individuals for some time. Your recent activities provided the perfect catalyst for action." Grace paused. "There's been a development you should know about. Gregory McCullough has retained serious legal counsel and is claiming that someone has been conducting an illegal surveillance and intimidation campaign against his family." Dale had expected this, and his lawyers are demanding a federal investigation into vigilante harassment, claiming their client is the victim of a conspiracy designed to frame him for crimes he didn't commit. Interesting strategy. Blame the messenger instead of addressing the message. Indeed. However, Mr. McCullough has made a tactical error. In his desperation to deflect attention, he's admitted to several activities that federal prosecutors find intriguing. Through the hospital room window, Dale could see news helicopters circling the city. Riverside had become the center of a media storm that was growing by the hour. What kind of activities? Payment to Mr. Fritz's organization for security services that included intimidating witnesses and destroying evidence. Bribes to Judge Farley that were carefully documented for tax purposes. Most damaging, recorded conversations with his son about covering up the hit and run that injured Casey. Dale's pulse quickened. Recorded conversations? It seems Dominic McCullough has been under federal surveillance for several months as part of a broader investigation into organized crime connections. The young man's vehicle modifications were funded through some very interesting sources. This was news to Dale. His focus had been on local corruption, but apparently the McCullough family's criminal activities extended into federal jurisdiction. What kind of sources? The kind that launder money through legitimate businesses like car customization shops. Dominic's hobby was actually a front for a money laundering operation that connected his family to several interstate criminal organizations. The implications were staggering. The McCulloughs weren't just local criminals. They were part of a larger network that had attracted federal attention long before Dale began his campaign of justice. "Mr. Roberson, would you be willing to meet with federal prosecutors? Your evidence and testimony could be crucial in ensuring comprehensive prosecution." Dale glanced at Casey, whose eyelids had been fluttering slightly since the sedation was reduced. "When and where?" "This afternoon, 3 p.m., at the federal building downtown. Ask for Assistant U.S. Attorney Cassandra Sawyer. And Mr. Roberson, bring everything you have." The meeting with Cassandra Sawyer revealed the full scope of the federal investigation. A sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, she'd been building cases against organized crime families for 20 years. The McCullough connection had emerged during a broader investigation into money laundering operations across 3 states. Your son's accident was actually a blessing in disguise, Mr. Roberson, Sawyer explained, spreading files across the conference table. Dominic's bragging about the hit-and-run led to recorded admissions that connected several previously unrelated cases. Dale studied photographs of crime scenes, financial documents, and surveillance images. How long have you been watching them? 18 months. We knew Gregory McCullough was corrupt, but proving it required catching him in the act of taking bribes or ordering illegal activities. Your private investigation forced him to make desperate moves that gave us the evidence we needed. What about Dominic? He'll be charged with vehicular assault, leaving the scene of an accident, and money laundering. The organized crime connections add federal racketeering charges. He's looking at 20 to 30 years, minimum. Dale felt grim satisfaction. Justice was finally catching up with the people who destroyed his family's peace. There's one more thing, Sawyer continued. We'd like you to wear a wire. For what? Gregory McCullough has been trying to reach you through intermediaries. He wants to negotiate, probably offering money or threats to make you disappear. We want you to meet with him while recording the conversation. The request was dangerous, but logical. A recorded confession would eliminate any possibility of the McCulloughs escaping prosecution through legal technicalities. Tomorrow night, he's agreed to meet at his estate, thinking privacy will work in his favor. You'll have FBI surveillance and backup, but you'll be alone with him for the actual conversation. Dale had faced worse odds in places much more dangerous than suburban mayors' estates. I'll do it. As he prepared to leave, Sawyer handed him a card. Mr. Roberson, I know what you've been through. Your son is lucky to have a father willing to fight for justice. But after tomorrow night, I want you to let the legal system handle this. These people are going to prison for a very long time. Dale nodded, but privately he reserved judgment. The legal system had failed his family once. He wouldn't let it fail again. Returning to the hospital, Dale found Marta holding Casey's hand and speaking softly. As he approached, Casey's eyes opened, unfocused, but definitely conscious. Dale. Marta's voice broke with joy. He woke up 20 minutes ago. The doctors say his responses are excellent. Casey's mouth moved, trying to form words. Dale leaned close. Tears he hadn't allowed himself to shed finally flowing freely. Dad. Casey's voice was barely a whisper, but it was the most beautiful sound Dale had ever heard. I'm here, son. You're safe. Everything's going to be all right. As Casey drifted back to sleep, Dale made a silent promise. His son was going to recover fully, and the people responsible for nearly killing him were going to pay every price the law allowed. Tomorrow night, Gregory McCullough would learn that threatening Dale Roberson's family was the worst mistake he'd ever made. The war was almost over, but the final battle would determine whether justice was truly served. Chapter 6. The Mayor's Last Stand. Gregory McCullough's estate occupied 12 acres of prime real estate overlooking the river, a monument to 20 years of political corruption disguised as public service. Dale arrived at sunset, surveillance equipment provided by the FBI hidden beneath his jacket. The wire transmitted everything to federal agents positioned throughout the surrounding woods. The mayor himself answered the door, looking like a man who'd aged years in the past week. His usual political polish had cracked, revealing the desperate criminal beneath. Mr. Roberson, thank you for coming. I trust the drive wasn't too difficult. Not at all. Dale followed McCullough through a house that screamed of wealth acquired through public service. Artwork worth more than most people's annual salaries, furniture that belonged in museums, wine collections that represented decades of fine living funded by taxpayer money. They settled in McCullough's study, a room dominated by photographs of the mayor with state and federal politicians, all of whom would be distancing themselves from him very soon. Drink, McCullough offered, pouring himself 3 fingers of bourbon. I'm fine. Let's discuss why you wanted this meeting. McCullough settled into a leather chair that probably cost more than Casey's college tuition. Mr. Roberson, we both know you've been conducting an investigation into my family's activities. I'll be direct. I'm prepared to make you a very generous offer to discontinue that investigation. What kind of offer? $2 million, deposited into any account you specify. In exchange, you stop cooperating with federal investigators and destroy any evidence you've collected. Dale maintained his composure, but internally he marveled at the man's audacity. Even facing federal prosecution, McCullough still believed money could solve his problems. And if I refuse? McCullough's expression hardened. Then things become more complicated. You see, Mr. Roberson, you've made some powerful enemies in your quest for revenge. People who don't appreciate civilians conducting private intelligence operations in their territories. What people? The kind who made significant investments in this community's stability. Your activities have been disruptive to certain business relationships that extend far beyond Riverside. Dale understood the implication. The organized crime connections that had attracted federal attention weren't just about money laundering. They represented territorial agreements that his investigation had disrupted. Are you threatening me, Mayor? I'm offering you an opportunity to walk away wealthy instead of ending up like your son. McCullough leaned forward. Accidents happen, Mr. Roberson. Sometimes to entire families. The threat against Marta crystallized Dale's resolve. Whatever happened next, Gregory McCullough had just sealed his own fate. Let me make sure I understand you correctly, Dale said carefully, knowing the wire was recording everything. You're offering me $2 million to stop cooperating with federal prosecutors investigating your family's crimes. And if I refuse, you'll arrange for accidents to happen to my wife and me. I'm offering you a business arrangement that benefits everyone involved. The same kind of arrangement you had with Judge Farley? Pay him to dismiss charges against your son. McCullough's political instincts finally kicked in. I never said anything about paying Judge Farley. But you did pay him. Just like you paid Reuben Fritz to intimidate witnesses. Just like you've been paying people to cover up your son's crimes for years. You can't prove any of that. Dale smiled. Actually, I can. Federal prosecutors have financial records showing every bribe, every payoff, every illegal transaction your family made over the past 20 years. Your own lawyers have been documenting your crimes for tax purposes. McCullough's face went pale. That's privileged information. Not when it's evidence of ongoing criminal conspiracy. Your attorney-client privilege doesn't extend to money laundering operations. The mayor stood abruptly, moving to a wall safe hidden behind one of his ego photographs. Dale tensed, ready to move if McCullough produced a weapon, but instead the man withdrew a thick folder. Mr. Roberson, perhaps you don't understand the full scope of what you're dealing with. McCullough opened the folder, revealing photographs that made Dale's blood run cold. Pictures of Marta at the grocery store, Casey's hospital room, Dale himself meeting with federal prosecutors, all taken within the past 48 hours. Impressive surveillance work, Dale said, his voice steady despite the rage building inside him. My business partners have been watching your family very carefully. They're concerned about your cooperation with federal authorities. Your business partners being the organized crime families you've been laundering money for? McCullough's eyes flashed with anger. You think you're so clever, don't you? Former CIA, playing spy games with small-town politicians. But you have no idea what you've stumbled into. Enlighten me. This community generates over $50 million annually in clean money for 3 different families. Your investigation threatens relationships that took 20 years to build. Those families don't appreciate disruption. Dale processed this information, understanding finally why federal prosecutors had been so interested in his evidence. The McCullough corruption wasn't just local. It was part of a regional money laundering network worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And you think threatening my family will make this problem go away? I think you're a rational man who understands that some fights can't be won. McCullough returned the photographs to the safe. Take the money, Mr. Roberson. Disappear with your wife and son. Start over somewhere safe. Like the families of your son's previous victims? The ones who suddenly moved out of state after taking your money. McCullough's composure cracked completely. My son is not a criminal. He's a troubled young man who made mistakes. Everything I've done has been to protect my family. By covering up hit and runs? By bribing judges? By threatening witnesses? By doing whatever was necessary. McCullough slammed his bourbon glass on the desk. You have no idea what it's like to watch your child destroy himself with reckless behavior. Dominic has problems, but he doesn't deserve to spend his life in prison. What about my son? Did he deserve to spend his life in a coma because your troubled child needed to test his car modifications? McCullough was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried genuine regret. I'm sorry about Casey. Truly sorry. But nothing can change what happened. The only question now is whether you want to survive what comes next. And what comes next? Federal prosecution will take years. During that time, my business partners will be very motivated to silence witnesses. You've made yourself and your family targets by refusing to be reasonable. Dale stood to leave. Mayor, you've made several serious mistakes tonight. First, you admitted to bribing federal judges and paying for witness intimidation. Second, you confessed to operating a money laundering conspiracy with organized crime families. Third, and most importantly, you threatened my family. McCullough's face went white as he realized what he'd revealed during their recorded conversation. Everything you've said tonight is being transmitted to federal agents positioned around your property. By morning, you'll be facing additional charges that will ensure you spend the rest of your life in federal prison. As Dale reached the study door, McCullough called out, "You think this ends with me? My partners won't let this investigation continue. They have resources you can't imagine." Dale turned back, his expression cold. "Mayor, I've spent 20 years dealing with people who had resources you can't imagine. The difference is that they were patriots fighting for their countries. You're just a small-town criminal who got in over his head." "This isn't over, Roberson." "Yes, it is." As Dale walked out of the McCullough estate, federal agents emerged from the shadows to arrest the mayor on charges of bribery, conspiracy, money laundering, and witness intimidation. The conversation had provided everything prosecutors needed to ensure Gregory McCullough would never see freedom again. But as Dale drove back to the hospital to check on Casey, he knew the mayor's warning about his business partners wasn't entirely bluff. The organized crime connections meant this victory was incomplete. Dangerous people with long memories now knew his name. The war against the McCullough family was ending, but a larger conflict was just beginning. And this time, Dale would need more than surveillance equipment and federal prosecutors to protect his family. Chapter 7: Shadows and Allies. 3 days after Gregory McCullough's arrest, Dale received confirmation that his warnings about organized crime retaliation weren't paranoid delusion. Mark Daly called at dawn with disturbing surveillance intelligence. "Dale, we've got problems. 3 vehicles with out-of-state plates have been conducting reconnaissance on your house, the hospital, and Marta's workplace. Professional work, rotating teams, encrypted communications, no digital footprints." Dale was already moving toward his basement command center. How professional. Former military, possibly federal contractors gone private. These aren't street thugs, or even typical mob soldiers. Someone hired premium talent. The escalation made tactical sense. Gregory McCullough's organized crime partners couldn't allow a federal investigation to unravel their money laundering network. Eliminating the primary witness, Dale, would send a message to other potential cooperators while protecting millions of dollars in illegal revenue. "What's our timeline?" Dale asked, powering up surveillance monitors and communications equipment. "Unknown, but they're moving to operational positioning. I'd estimate 24 to 72 hours before they make their move." Dale's phone buzzed with an encrypted text from Cassandra Sawyer. "Need immediate meeting. New developments in McCullough case. Federal building, 1 hour." The timing wasn't coincidental. Federal prosecutors had discovered the same intelligence Mark had uncovered. Dale's cooperation with the investigation had made him a target for elimination. "Mark, implement threat-level alpha protocols. Full surveillance lockdown, active countermeasures authorized." "Copy that." "Dale, these people aren't playing games. Maybe it's time to consider witness protection." The suggestion galled Dale, but he understood Mark's concern. Witness protection would keep his family alive, but it would also mean abandoning Casey during his recovery and allowing criminals to dictate their lives through fear. "Not yet. Let's see what federal prosecutors are offering." Assistant U.S. Attorney Cassandra Sawyer looked like she hadn't slept in days when Dale arrived at the federal building. Her usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, her eyes rimmed with exhaustion. "Mr. Roberson, thank you for coming quickly. We have a serious problem." She led him to a secure conference room where Agent Byron O'Neill was waiting. Dale's former CIA handler looked older than his years, his expression grim. "Byron, what are you doing here?" "Cleaning up a mess that's gotten out of control." Byron gestured to files spread across the table. "Dale, the McCullough investigation has uncovered something much larger than local corruption. We're looking at a money laundering network that spans 3 states and involves elements of Russian organized crime." The implications hit Dale immediately. Russian criminal organizations didn't just eliminate witnesses. They destroyed entire families as examples to future threats. How deep does this go? Dale asked. Cassandra answered. Gregory McCullough's operation was processing over $200 million annually in clean money. The Russian connections were providing both funding and protection for the network. Your investigation has threatened relationships that took a decade to build. And now they want me dead. They want your entire family dead, Byron corrected. Russian crime families don't leave loose ends. They'll kill you, Marta, Casey, and anyone else who might have information about their operations. Dale studied surveillance photos of the men watching his family. Professional killers with military training and unlimited resources, exactly the kind of enemy he'd faced during his CIA years, but now his family was in the crosshairs. What are you proposing? Witness protection, Cassandra said immediately. New identities, relocation to a secure facility, federal marshals providing round-the-clock security. For how long? Until we've dismantled the entire network and eliminated the threat. Could be years. Dale shook his head. My son is recovering from traumatic brain injury. He needs specialized medical care, familiar surroundings, family support. Witness protection would destroy his chances for full recovery. The alternative is his death, Byron said bluntly. Dale, I've seen what these people do to families. Casey won't recover from anything if Russian assassins put bullets in his hospital bed. Then we eliminate the threat. Cassandra looked alarmed. Mr. Roberson, you're not seriously suggesting. I'm suggesting we stop playing defense and start dismantling their network systematically. Dale turned to Byron. Who's running their operations? Where are they based? What resources do they have? Byron hesitated, then pulled out a classified file. Against my better judgment, the network is controlled by Dmitry Kozlov, a Russian oligarch with connections to state intelligence services. He operates through intermediaries like McCullough, keeping himself insulated from direct criminal liability. Where is he? New York, primarily. But he has safe houses throughout the Northeast and private security that rivals small armies. Dale studied Kozlov's photograph, a man in his 60s with intelligent eyes and expensive clothes, the kind of criminal who'd traded state service for private profit after the Soviet collapse. What's his weakness? Arrogance, Byron said immediately. Kozlov believes American law enforcement is too constrained by legal procedures to threaten him effectively. He's been operating in the U.S. for 15 years without serious prosecution. Because he's careful, or because he has protection? Both. He maintains plausible deniability through layers of intermediaries while paying federal officials for advance warning of investigations. Cassandra looked horrified. Are you suggesting federal corruption? I'm stating a fact, Byron replied. Kozlov has been bribing FBI agents, federal prosecutors, and federal judges for over a decade. Your McCullough investigation only succeeded because it started at the local level and escalated before he could corrupt the process. The scope of the corruption was staggering, but it also revealed Kozlov's fundamental weakness. His network depended on predictable legal processes and corrupted officials. A direct assault by someone operating outside official channels would bypass his entire protection system. Byron, I need everything you have on Kozlov's operations. Financial records, security protocols, personnel files, property holdings, everything. Dale, what are you planning? What I should have done from the beginning. Instead of reacting to threats against my family, I'm going to eliminate the source. Cassandra stood abruptly. Absolutely not. The federal government cannot and will not support vigilante action against foreign nationals, regardless of their criminal activities. Then don't support it. But don't try to stop it either. Byron studied Dale's face, recognizing the expression from their years working together. You're serious about this? Dead serious. Kozlov's people want to threaten my family? They're about to discover why that's a fatal mistake. Dale, even if you could reach Kozlov, which is extremely unlikely, killing him would create an international incident. The Russian government would demand retaliation. Let them demand whatever they want. My son nearly died because some Russian criminal thought he could operate in American cities without consequences. Time to teach him otherwise. As Dale prepared to leave, Byron handed him the classified file. I'm not giving you this. You never saw it. And Dale, if this goes wrong, I can't help you. Understood. But if I don't come back, make sure Marta and Casey are protected. You have my word. Walking out of the federal building, Dale felt the familiar sensation of crossing from the world of laws and procedures into the shadow realm where survival depended on intelligence, planning, and superior violence. He'd hoped never to return to that world, but Dmitry Kozlov had made the choice for him. The Russian oligarch was about to learn that threatening Dale Roberson's family was the last mistake he'd ever make. Chapter 8: The Reckoning. Dmitry Kozlov's Manhattan penthouse occupied the top 3 floors of a building he owned through shell companies, providing both luxury and security for a man who'd made enemies across 2 continents. Dale spent 72 hours studying the target, using resources that officially didn't exist and contacts who disappeared from government records years ago. The building's security was impressive but predictable: armed guards, surveillance systems, reinforced access points designed to stop conventional attacks. What it couldn't stop was a man who'd spent 20 years infiltrating facilities protected by actual intelligence services rather than private contractors. Dale's approach came at 3 a.m. through the building's mechanical systems, using blueprints provided by a city inspector who owed him favors from the old days. The ventilation shafts were large enough for human passage, and Kozlov's arrogance had led him to assume no one would attempt such a crude infiltration method against someone of his stature. The penthouse was a monument to stolen wealth: artwork looted from Russian museums, furniture that belonged in palaces, wine collections worth more than most people's homes. Dale moved through rooms that screamed of corruption and violence disguised as sophistication. Kozlov himself was awake, sitting in his study reviewing financial reports from his money laundering operations. A man in his 60s with silver hair and cold eyes, he looked like a successful businessman rather than a criminal who'd ordered the deaths of dozens of people. Dmitry Kozlov. Dale announced his presence. The Russian spun around, his hand moving toward a pistol in his desk drawer. Dale's first shot, fired through a suppressor, shattered the man's wrist before he could complete the motion. "That was unwise," Dale said, moving into the study. "We need to have a conversation about your business operations in my country." Kozlov clutched his wounded wrist, blood seeping through his fingers. His eyes showed pain but no fear, a man accustomed to violence, even when it was directed at him. "You must be Dale Roberson," Kozlov said, his English accented but perfect. "I have been expecting someone like you." "Have you?" "Of course. When Gregory McCullough was arrested, I knew his federal cooperation would eventually lead to complications. You Americans are so predictable in your responses to family threats." Dale settled into a chair across from Kozlov, his weapon trained on the Russian's center mass. "Then you understand why I'm here. To kill me, presumably. Very direct, very American. But Mr. Roberson, killing me will not solve your problem. My organization exists beyond any single individual. We'll see about that." Kozlov gestured to his wounded wrist. "May I bandage this? Blood loss makes conversation difficult." Dale nodded, watching carefully as the Russian wrapped his injury with a silk scarf. Even wounded and at gunpoint, Kozlov maintained the composed demeanor of a man accustomed to controlling dangerous situations. "Mr. Roberson, I propose a business arrangement. You discontinue your cooperation with federal prosecutors, and I ensure your family's safety. Everyone benefits from this arrangement." "The same arrangement you offered Gregory McCullough?" "Mayor McCullough was useful but replaceable. You, however, possess skills and knowledge that could be quite valuable to my organization. Former CIA officers with your experience are rare commodities." The offer was genuine, Dale realized. Kozlov was actually trying to recruit him rather than simply eliminate a threat. "You're suggesting I work for you?" "I'm suggesting we work together. Your government pension provides comfortable retirement, but my organization offers genuine wealth. Your family could live anywhere in the world, protected by resources no government could match. In exchange for what? Your expertise in intelligence operations, your connections within American law enforcement, your skills in problem resolution." Kozlov leaned forward despite the pain in his wounded wrist. "Mr. Roberson, men like us understand that governments serve themselves, not their people. Why limit yourself to serving masters who will discard you when convenient?" The recruitment pitch was sophisticated, appealing to Dale's experience with government bureaucracy and political hypocrisy. But it revealed Kozlov's fundamental misunderstanding of the man he was trying to corrupt. "Dmitry, you've made a serious error in judgment." "What error?" You assumed I was here to negotiate. Dale's second shot took Kozlov through the heart, ending the conversation permanently. The Russian oligarch died as he'd lived, surrounded by stolen wealth and convinced that money could solve any problem. Moving quickly through the penthouse, Dale accessed Kozlov's computer systems and safe, copying financial records and contact information for the entire money laundering network. The files would provide federal prosecutors with evidence to dismantle operations across 3 states, eliminating the threat to his family while serving justice for countless victims. The infiltration route that had brought him in provided an equally effective exit strategy. By the time Kozlov's security discovered their employer's body, Dale was across the city, transmitting encrypted files to Byron O'Neill and Cassandra Sawyer. The phone call to Byron came at dawn. "It's done," Dale reported. "Kozlov's network is finished. I'm sending you everything you need to roll up their operations." "Dale, Jesus Christ, what did you do? What needed to be done? Your prosecutors will have enough evidence to indict 50 people within the week. The threat to my family is eliminated. And Kozlov won't be making any more threats against American families." Byron was quiet for a long moment. "Dale, this is going to create massive complications. The Russian government can complain all they want. Kozlov was a criminal operating illegally in the United States. If Moscow wants to make an issue of his death, they'll have to admit he was their agent. That's not how international relations work. That's exactly how they work. Kozlov's death eliminates a problem for both governments. The Russians get rid of an embarrassing criminal, and Americans get rid of a security threat." "You sound awfully confident about that assessment." "Because it's accurate. Dmitry Kozlov was running unauthorized operations that threatened to expose Russian intelligence activities in the U.S. His death solves more problems than it creates." Dale was back in Riverside by evening, arriving at the hospital to find Casey awake and alert, sitting up in bed while Marta read to him from his favorite book. The sight of his son's improving condition made every risk he'd taken worthwhile. "Dad," Casey's voice was stronger, his movements more coordinated. "Mom says you've been working on some kind of case related to my accident." Dale exchanged glances with Marta, who nodded slightly. They'd agreed to tell Casey the truth when he was ready to handle it. "The people responsible for your accident have been arrested, son. They're going to prison for a very long time." "Good." Casey's expression hardened with an anger Dale had never seen in his gentle son. "I hope they rot in there." "They will. But Casey, what's important now is your recovery. The doctors say you can come home next week if you continue improving." Casey smiled, the first genuine happiness Dale had seen from him since the accident. "I can't wait to sleep in my own bed again." "And Dad?" "Yes. Thank you for making sure they paid for what they did." As Dale held his son's hand, he reflected on the path that had brought them to this moment. Gregory McCullough was facing life in federal prison. His son Dominic would spend decades behind bars for vehicular assault and money laundering. Judge Farley had been disbarred and sentenced to 20 years for corruption. The entire network of criminals who'd thought they were above the law had discovered otherwise. Most importantly, his family was safe. Casey was recovering. Marta was no longer living in fear, and the threats that had shadowed their lives for weeks had been permanently eliminated. Dale Roberson had retired from the CIA to live a quiet life growing tomatoes and watching his son become a man. But when that peace was shattered by criminal arrogance, he'd proven that some fathers were far more dangerous than their enemies realized. The war was over. Justice had been served, and the Roberson family could finally begin healing. Chapter 9: New Beginnings. 6 months later, Dale stood in his garden watching Casey walk without assistance for the first time since the accident. His son's recovery had exceeded every medical prediction, a testament to youth, determination, and excellent care. The physical therapy sessions had been grueling, but Casey had approached rehabilitation with the same methodical persistence he'd inherited from his father. "The tomatoes look good this year," Casey observed, examining plants that had grown tall and strong during his recovery. "They should. I had a lot of time to tend them while you were healing." Casey smiled, understanding the deeper meaning. His father had spent months dividing attention between garden work and ensuring their family's safety, creating normalcy while dismantling the criminal network that had threatened their lives. The legal aftermath had unfolded exactly as Dale predicted. Gregory McCullough received life without parole for his role in the money laundering conspiracy. Dominic McCullough was sentenced to 35 years for vehicular assault, leaving the scene of an accident, and racketeering charges. Judge Farley died in federal prison after serving only 8 months, officially a heart attack, though Dale suspected Kozlov's former associates had reached him even behind bars. The broader organized crime network had collapsed within weeks of Kozlov's death. Federal prosecutors, armed with the Russians' financial records, indicted over 60 people across 3 states. The money laundering operations that had processed hundreds of millions in criminal proceeds were permanently dismantled. More importantly, no retaliation had materialized against Dale's family. Kozlov's death had created chaos within his organization as lieutenants fought for control of remaining assets. The survivors were too busy protecting themselves to pursue vengeance against the man who destroyed their empire. "Dad, I've been thinking about what I want to study in college," Casey said, settling into a lawn chair his physical therapist had recommended. "And criminal justice. Maybe law enforcement or prosecution work. What happened to us? It made me realize how many people need someone to fight for them when the system fails." Dale felt pride mixed with concern. Casey's desire to serve justice was admirable, but it would place him in danger again, a different kind of threat than Russian assassins, but real nonetheless. "That's a challenging career path, son. Are you sure you want to spend your life dealing with the worst aspects of human nature?" "Someone has to. And after what you did for our family, I understand that sometimes justice requires people willing to go beyond what's officially allowed." The comment revealed how much Casey had learned about his father's response to the criminal conspiracy. Dale and Marta had been careful about details, but their son was intelligent enough to understand that Gregory McCullough's downfall hadn't been accomplished through legal channels alone. "Casey, what I did was necessary, but not something to be admired or emulated. The system should work without requiring vigilante action. But it didn't work. The mayor was corrupt, the judge was bought, the police were intimidated. If you hadn't acted outside the system, Dominic McCullough would still be driving around town knowing he could hurt people without consequences." Dale sat down beside his son, choosing his words carefully. "That's true, but the cost of that kind of action is enormous. I had to do things that will stay with me forever. I had to risk everything our family built together. And I had to become someone I'd hoped never to be again. Do you regret it?" Dale looked at Casey's face, still bearing faint scars from the accident, but bright with intelligence and determination. Then he glanced toward the house, where Marta was preparing lunch and humming contentedly for the first time in months. "No, I don't regret it. But I hope you never face choices that require such actions. What if I do? Then you'll make the right decision, just like you're making now by choosing a career in justice. But Casey, remember that the best way to fight corruption is by being incorruptible yourself. Be the prosecutor who can't be bought, the investigator who follows evidence regardless of politics, the law enforcement officer who treats everyone equally under the law." Casey nodded thoughtfully. "Like Assistant U.S. Attorney Sawyer?" "Exactly like Cassandra Sawyer. She built cases through careful investigation and legal procedures, not through extra-legal methods. But she needed your evidence to make those cases work." Dale smiled at his son's perceptive analysis. "She did. Which proves that even the best legal minds sometimes need help from people willing to gather information through unconventional means." Marta emerged from the house carrying a tray of sandwiches and lemonade, her face radiant with happiness that had been absent during the dark months of Casey's recovery and the legal battles. "What are my 2 favorite men discussing so seriously?" she asked, settling into a chair beside them. "Casey's future career plans," Dale replied. "He wants to study criminal justice. Following in his father's footsteps, in a way." Marta reached over to squeeze Dale's hand. "I'm proud of both of you. What you did to protect our family, what Casey's doing to recover from his injuries. It shows the strength that runs in the Roberson bloodline." "What about your future, Mom?" Casey asked. "Now that all the legal stuff is finished, what do you want to do?" Marta considered the question. "I'd like to get involved with victim advocacy work. Maybe help families navigate the legal system when their children are hurt by criminals. Use our experience to help other people get justice." Dale felt deep satisfaction at his wife's choice. Like Casey, she'd transformed trauma into a desire to serve others facing similar challenges. "That's perfect," Dale said. "You understand what families go through when the system fails them. And you understand how to make the system work when it needs to. Marta replied, her meaning clear. As they sat together in the garden, surrounded by growing plants and recovering from events that had nearly destroyed their family, Dale reflected on the lessons of the past year. Evil existed in the world, often protected by wealth and political connections that placed it beyond conventional justice. But good people, determined parents, honest law enforcement officers, courageous prosecutors, could still triumph when they refused to accept corruption as inevitable. His phone buzzed with a text from Byron O'Neill. New situation developing. International scope. Interested, Dale looked at the message, then at his family. Casey was laughing at something Marta had said, his face animated with the joy of simply being alive. His wife was planning a future dedicated to helping others. Their garden was flourishing under care and attention. He deleted the message without responding. Dale Roberson had served his country for 20 years, then served his family when they needed protection. Now, finally, it was time to serve the peace he'd fought so hard to achieve. The tomatoes needed tending. His son needed support as he returned to school, and his wife deserved the quiet happiness she'd sacrificed during his years of service. There would always be new threats, new injustices, new criminals who believed themselves above the law. But there would also be new generations of people like Casey and Marta, ready to fight for justice through legal means and moral courage. The war for the Roberson family's survival was over. The victory they'd achieved, Casey's recovery, justice for their attackers, and the preservation of their life together, was complete. In his basement, the steel door remained locked. The tools of his former profession would stay hidden, ready if needed but unused if possible. Dale Roberson was a father, a husband, and a gardener again. And that was exactly who he wanted to be. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.